So, I mean, I'll let you guys decide which you think is more valid. Small city to large mountain.
No, God!
Large planet level.
No, God, please, no! No! No!
Or universal.
No!
To give a little background on why I'm making this video, about a week ago, Key Issues made a video called How Powerful is Ahsoka Tano? I think you can tell by the intro, but I did not agree with what they said in that video at all. However, I did not plan on making a video in response to it. That is, until the fateful day. The day after their video was released, the new episode of Mandalorian came out. And in that episode we saw Ahsoka struggle with a non-force sensitive woman with a spear. I was actually disappointed with how weak Filoni made Ahsoka seem, which is odd because he usually wanks the hell out of her. Remembering the How Strong Ahsoka Was video, I jokingly commented, not powerful enough to easily beat a woman with a spear. Instead of realizing it was a joke or giving an intelligent response, Key Issues decided to sarcastically mock my intelligence over a comment about a fictional character.
You dare mock me, ape?
Instead of stooping to his level, I explained how her face was clearly straining during the fight, which wouldn't even make sense if she was even close to city level, considering the person she was fighting seemed to be a regular human. I even explained how it could be written off as a bad showing or an outlier, and I didn't actually think Ahsoka was that weak. But it's just flat out headcanon to say Ahsoka was holding back, especially when her facial expressions depict the opposite. He then responds sarcastically again, saying how it was totally headcanon even though Ahsoka wasn't trying to kill her in that fight. I then explained that not trying to kill your opponent doesn't mean you should have problems with them if there's a massive strength gap, and how she should have just been able to hold her down with the Force or casually disarm or overpower her. Shout out to whoever liked my comment. He didn't respond again after this, but the deed had already been done. He had just triggered the most powerful weeaboo on YouTube. It's time to explain why almost everything regarding power in his video is wrong. To get Vader's city-level telekinetic power, Key Issues used the calculations done by the game theorists. Problem is, that calculation has a major flaw. They talk about how Vader held back water that was coming into a glass hallway deep underwater, and used how deep they were and how thick the hallway was to calculate how much force Vader would need to hold back the water. Sounds reasonable, right?
Wrong.
That is absolutely
Wrong.
proved over and over again.
Wrong.
He actually advocates.
The problem with this is that it would only be accurate once the tunnel completely fills up with water. Before that, Vader would just be pushing the water down an empty tunnel, which wouldn't require much more force than if he were on the surface. So unless Vader stayed there until the water completely filled up the glass hallway, their calc is flawed. Even if the calculation was correct, I would argue it's an outlier, as we have seen Vader's telekinetic limits before. He wasn't able to instantly crush an AT-AT, and he had trouble with multiple giant alien creatures before, having to resort to killing 2 of them with his lightsaber, and he wasn't even able to kill the Zillo Beast. If he had city or above telekinetic power, he would be able to pop those creatures like grapes. He then said Vader was able to use his force barrier to block dozens of proton torpedoes and says that exceeds 1.253 gigatons, which puts it at large mountain level. First off, I have no idea how he got that number. They later say all of their calculations in the video will be linked in the description, but I checked the description and didn't find them, so I can only go off what I see. The explosions themselves are barely larger than his TIE fighter, so the only other way he could come up with a number like that is if there's some other source that says how powerful proton torpedoes are. But he did not source that in the video, so I'm not sure. Even if it was true, he didn't actually block the explosions themselves. He just made them veer off course, as the scan literally says, and the explosions were most likely from them colliding with each other. That being said, based off visuals, I do think Vader should easily be able to defend against explosions of that size with his force barrier. But again, large mountain level is just way too much. I don't know if this was by mistake, but he then says there's some statements that say Vader's more powerful than the Death Star, and then proceeds to show statements saying he's more powerful than a Star Destroyer. Which doesn't necessarily mean raw power, mind you. It could be taking into account how Vader's a much more strategic weapon and can go almost anywhere, sense people's intentions, and inspire fear. In A New Hope, Vader did say the ability to destroy a planet was insignificant next to the power of the Force, but notice his words. He said the Force, not himself. The Force is something that exists across the universe and within everything, so of course the entirety of the Force is beyond simple planet destruction. He then said you could possibly even scale him to Sidious, who can call upon all of the dark side of the Force, and is a vessel of all the Sith's power, which means he scales to the Sun, who can tear apart the fabric of the universe itself. First off, he only pushed Sidious back in a surprise attack, and Sidious immediately shocks him after that. Secondly, this isn't the same version of Sidious that either of those statements apply to. Thirdly, those could easily be hyperbolic statements. Not a single feat in Star Wars indicates anyone is even close to universal. Why would Palpatine need a fleet of planet-destroying Star Destroyers if he was universal? He could casually just crush any planet he wanted with the Force. Even at the height of his power, all his lightning did was shut off the Rebel fleet rather than destroy them. To be fair, it does seem like Key Issues personally doesn't think Vader scales to universal, but it seems he may think that Palpatine does, which is equally ridiculous. The one really impressive feat that Key Issues brought up that wasn't completely off the mark was Vader surviving the massive Sith Temple explosion on Malachor. They exaggerate it though and say Vader absolutely tanks it, when we could see him walk out limping and wheezing. They said the blast was calculated to be town level, and this time I don't think that seems too far off, as visually it's massive. However, it's not like Vader took every single ounce of energy from the blast. As if he did, the rest of the explosion wouldn't have continued to go outwards and destroy things. And unless he was literally directly in the exact center of the explosion, he would have only been hit by a portion of the force from it. However, he should probably still be somewhat relative to that power, at least in his defensive capabilities. And you could argue this is backed by how he survived being grabbed and thrown around by a creature that seemed to have at least around city block level power. So when it comes to Vader's defensive capabilities, I do think he could be argued to be around city block to town level, but that's about the limit I would go for now. And Ahsoka scaling to Vader in terms of defensive power is questionable. In fact, I think she scales closer to Maul, whose best feat was destroying the hyperdrive engines of a Star Destroyer, which seemed to take just about everything he had, and that feat is visually only building level, which actually lines up with Vader struggling to destroy the AT-AT. Maul also needed Ezra's help to lift the stone slabs in the Sith Temple, and was noticeably tired while doing so, though you could argue he was faking that. I hope you all enjoyed this video, including you, Key Issues. I have nothing against you, and hopefully you learned 2 things from this video. 1, that Ahsoka's weaker than you think, and 2, never mess with the Weeaboo warrior.
Only now, at the end, do you understand?